Hello and welcome to Theater Operations Unleashed, the monthly show that explores the ins and outs of theater operations, management, facilities, and design. I'm your host, Raymond Kent. In each episode, we will be focusing on management, operations, design, trends, and best practices in the performing arts. I hope to bring you both insights from my 4 decades in the industry, as well as engaging conversations with theater professionals about the challenges and rewards of their work. We'll also cover a wide range of topics from budgeting and scheduling to marketing and audience development, theater technology, and many other related topics. Whether you're a theater maker yourself or just interested in the industry, I hope you'll find this podcast informative and inspiring. So sit back, relax, or lean in, and let's dive into the world of theater. Hello, and welcome to Theater Operations Unleashed. I'm here with James Hart. He is the author of Classroom Exercises in Entrepreneurship, a Cross-disciplinary Approach. He is often recognized for innovation and pedagogical developments in practice. Hart has won multiple awards and recognitions at the university and national levels. His original experiential entrepreneurship exercises are used by professors worldwide. As an author, he's contributed to several books, written and co-written articles, pieces for American for the Arts, Theater Communications Group, and Edward Alger Publishing. A serial entrepreneur, Hart is the founder of the former dean of Titan Theatre Academy. I hope I said that right. The International Theatre Academy of Norway, a full-time accredited conservatory for theater entrepreneurship in Oslo, Norway, the first of its kind. And he is co-founder of the Society for Arts Entrepreneurship Education. Among other organizations, Hart just began a second term on the SAEE board. Artistically, he has served as an actor, a director, a writer, and producer. And as an actor, he has played roles at Yale Repertory Theater, Utah Shakespeare Festival, Williamstown Theater Festival, Shakespeare Festival of Dallas, and Dallas Theater Center, among others. Other artistic work of Hart's has been seen in America, Russia, Taiwan, Iran, Denmark, Norway, and Turkey. Hart earned his MFA in acting from the Yale School of Drama as a classmate of mine, and he graduated from Southern Methodist University with a BFA in theater in 1996. Jim, welcome to Theater Operations Unleashed.
It's such a joy. Thank you for having me.
So you've done so many great, amazing things in your career here, and you and I go back over 2 decades now, right? It's hard to believe it's been that long.
Really?
And kind of followed each other's careers and things like that. And you've created this sort of really interesting thing, entrepreneurship in the arts, at SMU. And it's such a needed thing in this industry. As you and I were sort of talking about before we started this, there is that big sort of hole and void of arts entrepreneurship and thinking about the business side. Do you want to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship in the arts and how you came up with that and how you formulated it and what sort of drove you into developing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I went to SMU and Yale, 2 remarkable theater training programs, some of the better ones, and especially Yale, in the world. And I entered the market and found that I could create art and collaborate enormously well, but I didn't know how to make a living. And I noticed that there was this path that most are put on in higher education and theater. Do these things to find work. And a lot of it had to do with giving your authority and ability to work over to others, casting directors, producers, so on and so forth. And, all good and well. But if you're in an oversaturated market such as New York, the likelihood of pursuing a career that leads to consistent, measurable results can be on par with winning the lottery, and until you're successful and you can leverage those successes, and more success, begets more success, sort of thing. But fresh out of grad school, it was a challenge, and I did work, but I found that my peers, as I looked around, were going from job to unemployment check, very typical of the acting industry. But I felt that was demoralizing. and I wanted greater autonomy over my creative career. And I found that I was very capable of having vision of scale. And what I mean by vision is you can see what does not yet exist, but can if you build it. And the actor's vision is the smallest in the creative process. It's keystone, but their role is to realize the voice of the playwright very often under the interpretation of the director and so on. And then above that, you have the writer, the story that's being told. You have designers and directors, still a larger vision. Then you have the producer who may have hired the director and is producing, very entrepreneurial pursuit. And then you have the entrepreneur who founded the theater or is one of the co-founders and is the reason that everyone's in the space. Had they not built it, no one would be there in the exact same way. And I found I was capable of having that largeness of vision, of scale, and really enjoyed it. And that got me into writing, directing, acting, and producing. And I found that going from job seeker to job giver was enormously transformative. And as a director, being the one who provided opportunities, most professionals are open to or looking for opportunities. I was able to direct Dylan Baker, Roger Rees, Marion Seldes, Kate Burton, these giants, of American theater. And I don't know that I would have had the same opportunity at that juncture of my career fresh out of school, but creating opportunities I did. And, I found that storytelling inherent in theatrical training is directly applicable to entrepreneurship. It's stories that inspire people, cause you to be remembered, motivate people to pull out their checkbook, so to speak, and I found too that a lot of the skills that I kind of intuitively landed on and by necessity as needs arose, I found that creativity was core in that process because the whole thing is creative. You're creating jobs, products, services, art, culture, financials, team members, or teams, this sort of thing. And once I understood that, then I could leverage my inherent assets, imagination and creative abilities into entrepreneurship. And what I found is that within arts entrepreneurship, there's an intrinsic and extrinsic value, intrinsic being the emotions felt, the experience, the internal experience, and extrinsic being the monetary value. And hopefully they have both. That Picasso is worth $10 million, but I look at that painting and it stirs my soul and I want to look at it every day, right? So extrinsic and intrinsic. And as fate would have it, my wife and I were newly married. Her mid-sized dance company in New York folded because of insufficient business knowledge, and it collapsed. So she was in transition. It was a great company, toured internationally, but that knowledge wasn't there because it wasn't taught. Mm-hmm. And I was in career transition and open to possibilities. And my wife's grandmother is an icon, now recently deceased, but icon pioneer, creative entrepreneur in Norway, was a prima ballerina in the opera. I created a dance school that at one point had 900 students, created a dance college still in existence today, honored by the king twice for contributions to culture. She was all that. And when I got over there, I had this idea of a school that in some ways I wish I'd gone to, that offered artistic excellence, but also the how to make a living part, or specific entrepreneurial component. And I told her about this vision. And she said, "You must do it." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe one day I will." And she was like, "No, you must do it." And I was like, well, I thought I'd like move here, learn the language, assimilate. And she's like, "No, you must do it. You must do it at once." And I took that leap of faith, recognizing that she would mentor me, the critical role necessary for most entrepreneurs, people who know more than you do and can equip you with tools and skills and knowledge. And she gave me a knowledge and a courage to make the leap and figure things out as I go. And what I learned is that you don't have to know how to do everything, and I think that's an inhibiting factor for a lot of people. You don't even necessarily have to have the money right now because there are ways of acquiring it, and some people stop because it's gonna be hard. Yeah, anything of unequivocal value will be in manifesting it, but you figure it out. You use your imagination, your creative capacity, and you either find people who do know how to do what you're trying to do, and partner with them, or you assume the learning curve. And recognizing that, I was able to bring that into this largeness of vision and create the first accredited school full-time, 2-year professional school in Norway, theater entrepreneurship. Now, when I looked around at the market and assessed, who else is in this space globally,
Mm-hmm.
I found about 5 schools in the world that were earnestly, meaningfully addressing this topic in a structured fashion. Now today, there are 155 schools approximately in America alone addressing creative or arts entrepreneurship. And there are 33 master's programs globally that I've identified, 36 ranging as far away as Australia, Malaysia.
Wow.
So it really is a movement. But speaking of largeness of vision, I recognized, as I think you've articulated in different words, but similar interpretation, that there's a standard in arts education, all arts technique, no real business skills. And this is changing in some measure, 155 schools, but I wanted to work to create a new standard in arts education, being my North Star goal. You never get to the North Star, it's guiding.
Absolutely.
And so I've worked, so that's why I co-founded the Society for Arts Entrepreneurship Education, provide best practices, bring people from all over the world together, to share resources, etc. And then the book came out of a desire to integrate how we learn in the arts through experience, right? We learn by doing. You want to become a painter, you got to paint, this sort of thing. So our academic structure, for example, at SMU, your 3-hour courses, 3 credit hours, usually meeting 50 minutes 3 times a week or twice for an hour and 20. And there's only so much you can do. At the school in Norway, I could push people out in the market while still in school and, trial by fire, see if they swam, and give them the opportunity to rise to the occasion. Phenomenal learning process.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't do that at SMU. It's a different structure. So I created a series of games, simulations, demonstrations, entrepreneurial experiences so that they can experience components of the entrepreneurial process. And consequently, they don't have to have faith that what I, as their professor, say is so. They have experience, right? They know. And they can draw upon that confidence that they gain through experience in the future when they pursue their own entrepreneurial endeavors. So it's been a process out of my own need and pain points, and trying to solve a problem, which is this standard that exists in arts education, has for a long time, and build a vision that I felt like would solve the problem. And entrepreneurs, they solve problems, right? Pain points,
Right.
large and small, existential and otherwise. But and then the vision continued to expand. Like we need this globally. And I wrote this piece for TCG as part of their blog, and it was the most widely shared and read post of their series because it resonated. That entrepreneurship is critical. And artists have always been entrepreneurial throughout time, but there's not been a formalized structure of recognition and the implementation of time-tested methods, which we also learned through in arts, right?
Right.
So that's what the next focus became, is to try to spread this globally. And the way to do that was to teach the teachers how to teach it in a way that appeals to creative sensibilities through the experiential exercises, 65 of them in my book. And I'm grateful to say that I didn't know how I would do, scariest endeavor I've ever participated in, writing a solo authored book. Didn't know if it would be, irrelevant, people just ignore it, or if people would be like, who is this chump? Like, this is ridiculous, waste of my money. Or if they'd be like, wow, this is good, I want to use it. And thankfully, the latter was the case. And so I try to influence the larger field on how entrepreneurs are educated, through higher education. So macro vision, in total to change the standard. And these are the various components to realize that. And then in my entrepreneurial venture, last part of the story is in Norway, as an entrepreneur for a decade there, and having built multiple ventures, some successes, some failures, I got burned out, just from the consistent stress of the endeavor. And I needed more of a team, which I've since learned from error. But I was looking for a transition, and SMU happened to be launching this new program in arts entrepreneurship. It was 1 year old, and they wanted someone to lead it. And I had all this experience with the first conservatory for theater entrepreneurship and a background in the arts and business, and it was a happy fit. And I've been there. This is my 11th year.
That's awesome. You bring up such great points. The biggest one for me is mentorship, right? I mean, I've owned as an entrepreneur myself. I've owned a couple companies now. Because like yourself, I had that mindset of what do I do? I didn't. I went out after school and said, oh, I could go work for this place, I could go work for that place. But how do you do that? And in this industry, work in the gig economy, you have to sell yourself. And on the
Mhm.
more artistic side, acting, there's agents and things like that that can deal with that. On the tech and design side, not so much, right?
Yeah.
So you really have to be entrepreneurial that way. And I've always been about, solving people's problems. Uh, and I think that's really what draws me to the world of theater is there's a lot of very interesting problems to solve,
Yeah.
particularly on the technical side, as you know, with all my little
Yeah.
things that I build and everything
Oh
else.
yeah.
Um, having good mentors along the way has been invaluable to me. And none of my mentors were in the arts, right? One was an accountant, one was a physician, these types of people that had started their own practices. They had some connection to the arts, but very, very loosely. Maybe they were on a board of an arts organization or things like that. But they found it interesting that I was more interested in the business aspect of it, even though they didn't understand how that would apply. But I think that without that sort of circle of, people much smarter than me in the room that knew how to grow a business and start a business and things like that. I think I felt very strongly that that was what I was lacking as well. And when when we were at the drama school, I actually snuck over to the school of management, took a couple classes.
Yeah.
And then this spring, I was fortunate enough to be accepted into Yale School of Management's you know uh, executive education program and
Fantastic.
creative leadership, right? And so getting that kind of level of exposure, but I was the only theater person in that entire program.
Yeah.
Everybody else was a graphic designer, had some other arts thing, but um, really, and they were all leaders, but really sort of applying that sort of business toolkit, that business mindset. I had a little bit of advantage because my father was an accountant. So
Yeah.
at least from the numbers side, I had somebody I could go, what is this? And my father-in-law, was a CEO of a big international tool and die company. So I could say, hey, what is this? And so I had those, two folks as mentors, which was invaluable, right?
Yeah.
But what I also have found in working, as you and I were talking about, working around the country with these different arts organizations, so many people that are in leadership positions of these great institutions, large and small, are flying the plane as they build it.
Yeah.
They don't have that training and background. And so it's fantastic that from an educational standpoint, 150 plus schools, that's great. What do you do for the people that are already out there, right? How do they know when they need the help? To me, it seems like that's the barrier, right? They don't know what they don't know, and they think they're doing the best that they can. But sometimes I think finding that mentorship,
Yep.
or even if you think you're doing everything perfect, you want to talk a little bit about that, about like how do you deal with people that
Yeah.
aren't there, like you
Yeah.
and I were, right?
Perfection is the enemy of innovation. And by innovation, I try to, simplify some of these seemingly, existential, terms. Innovation is just novelty. That's all it is, so everyone's capable of that. But a lot of the resources that we have at hand, sometimes we don't recognize the vastness of those resources, principally the people we know. People like to help those that they know, they like, and they trust. And I don't think I understood this when we were at Yale together. That, I heard of the Yale Mafia.
Yeah,
This,
yeah,
it seemed like I was coming into a literal family, like arms open upon graduation. But that was not at all the case. It was we were each other's network. Here we
right,
are,
right.
communicating. And I think
23 years later,
totally, totally.
right?
Yeah, and I think intensity of experience tends to bond people, because you have that touch point. But one of the exercises I create illustrates the vastness of our networks. So I'm teaching at SMU, small private school in Dallas, Texas, relatively affluent student body outside of the art school, which is very eclectic. But in the class, I'll say, how many of you, by show of hands, have access through the people you know to one of the living US presidents. And usually no hands go up, and then one student might raise their hand. I say, okay, well, what's your path? Well, my parents worked with the chief of staff at one point in the White House. The chief of staff had access to the president. Very good. Who else has access? And I'll keep asking this, and more hands will go up as they start to navigate, like you would on LinkedIn, looking for a position,
Sure.
that access, points of access. They start to recognize, like, oh, I know so-and-so, and et cetera. And I'll just keep asking, so how many of you have access to one of the US presidents? And eventually someone will note, oh, we all do, because my classmate does, right? So I have found that within the arts, and in life in general, if you're humble enough to ask, and you come with passion and an earnestness, and again, humility, and you ask people for help, very often they'll say yes.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and I did another exercise. This is from Kyle McDonald, who took his red paperclip, Canadian guy who consistently traded up in value.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Popular article, remember that? Yeah, so I was like, that's quintessential entrepreneurial wherewithal. So I took a shiny object, seemingly meaningless outside of the memory of childhood, a marble. And I would pair students up into A and B. And I'd say, okay, you're a duo, you're a team. Here's a marble. You're going to compete against the other teams in this class. And you're to amass as much value as possible. No leasing assets or anything like that. You have to own it outright, because we're going to donate everything to a nonprofit at the end. And whoever wins gets the illustrious title of champions of the day. And they can wear that all day long. And they thought that was fun. And what we discover is that the marble is a gimmick. It's meaningless. It's part of your story. The story is what's important, and the meaning behind it. And part of the story is we're competing with our classmates. We're trying to amass value. Everything's going to a nonprofit at the end, which attracted a lot of people. They go through their networks, and there reaches a point where they end up amassing unequivocal value, right? Like one of the duos who raised the most in a few weeks from a marble, they ended up with Land Rover wheels at some point in time. And, then they just undercut the market, what was presently out there, did their research, saw the average cost, and undercut the market and sold it. Now they had cash to play with. And in total, these two students from a marble were able to raise, I think it was $5,246 cash.
Wow.
Right. So what that demonstrates is people will help if you're humble enough to ask, right? But also if you have a good story, you inspire them with your passion. What they're principally choosing to support is you, as a person. So you are your chief asset. And I think a lot of individuals feel like, oh, I need all this stuff that's external. I don't have access. But in reality, you have many inherent assets, like imagination and creativity, the ones I've mentioned, your story, your passion, your personality, your network, right? Things of this nature that are unequivocally powerful if you are cognizant and you try.
I completely agree with that. I'll even add to that. One of the things that I love to do is when I work with a client, or I'm like meeting a client for the first time, or learning about a project and getting involved in that project, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, it's not about my story, not about my marble. It's about their marble.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And how do I recently started a project a few months back for a very well-known arts organization, doing a brand new ground up theater for them. And I said, but at the end of the day, we want this project to tell your story.
Mm-hmm.
And they hired us to do that because we had that conversation, right? And it was about, to your point, building that trust circle, expanding that network. And so often I think that people feel like, well, I can't reach out to that person to ask for help because they're going to want something in return, and I don't have anything of value to give to them.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
A feeling of lack. Yeah.
Right. And I think that it might be a lack of understanding, like your marble, of what the value can be.
Yeah.
And by telling that compelling story, because we are storytellers. You're exactly right. We are storytellers.
Yeah.
Even designers, lighting designers, crazy lighting designers and set designers like myself, we're storytellers. I tell my students this all the time. I'm always asked, we want a world-class theater. What can you do for me for world-class theater? Well, what is a world-class theater, right? Well, it's for me, it's the three things that I think I learned best at Yale. You need a great story.
Yep.
You need a great storyteller, somebody that can tell that story in a compelling way, and somebody to listen.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yeah.
You can do world-class theater with that, and you can grow that network and that camaraderie and that community around that.
Yeah. So I'm really into this. I was inspired. I was introduced to Joseph Campbell, a mythologist. His writing, wrote Hero with a Thousand Faces, inspired George Lucas to finish Star Wars. But one of the things he discovered was the mythic structure of the journey of the hero. And this hero journey structure is present in all world mythology. Those communities, those ancient cultures, they weren't communicating between like Egypt and Mexico, let's say, right? But this motif of the hero and heroine, we'll call it hero just for simplicity's sake, emerges in these world cultures. And Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, came up with the collective unconscious, protege of Freud. He theorized that the reason that this exists, the archetype of the hero, is perhaps we as humans, unconsciously or otherwise, perceive the structure as our walk through life. And what the structure entails is your ordinary world. Think of Luke Skywalker at the beginning of Star Wars, bored, impetuous young man. And then there's a call to adventure. It perceives a gap, like what you're talking about. And it's delivered by an archetype called a herald. And the herald basically says, hey, wake up, sleepy. It's time to go into the unknown, right? And usually the hero says, no, I'm not equipped. I don't want that. I'm not ready, so on and so forth. And if it stops there, it's the most boring story of all. It's potential unrealized.
Right.
But if they say yes, then it's like the universe shifts, and suddenly you're introduced to like a mentor, right? And that mentor equips you with tools like Luke Skywalker and the lightsaber with Ben Kenobi, this sort of thing. You go through trials and tribulations. It's a process of self-discovery. You end up in the belly of the beast, the central point of the Death Star and the trash compactor, right? But if you're able to come out of that belly, yes, you're scarred, by the experiences and the trauma of the adventure and, test allies and enemies and this sort of thing. But you're then more capable of going on the adventure. And then, the montage sequence, approach the inmost cave, it's called, where you're going to do battle with the dragon. You enter the dragon, or into the cave of the dragon, terribly scary place. And you do battle with this beast that sits on the treasure. Well, what is the treasure? It's not just gold and, this sort of thing. It's really self-knowledge. Know thyself, right? And if you understand who you are, you can act out of your own center, not what you think you should be doing. The well-meaning people in your life who say you should do this,
Yes.
act out of your own center. And then you come back and you integrate your finding into the community. And I find it very beautiful. It's very akin to the entrepreneurial adventure of going into the unknown and such, and change and serving something larger than yourself. That's the definition of a hero, serving something larger than yourself. And this applies to what you mentioned about serving other stories, but I want to share a quote. And this pertains to networking, what we talked about before, and feeling like, well, I don't know how to do that, and not being afraid of that. Here's the quote. It's at the top of The Power of Myth, great video series and book. Here it is. We have not even to risk the adventure alone, for the heroes of all time have gone before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known. We have only to follow the thread of the hero path. And where we thought to find an abomination, we shall find a god. And where we thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. And he goes on to talk about how we thought we were alone, but we'll find that we're with all the world, right? So this mythic motif is within us. And if we allow ourselves to recognize, like, oh, I'm the hero of my own story, and I'm serving something larger than myself, in this case, a customer segment, right? And so you serve their needs, not yours. And that's where a lot of artists get tripped up, because they're like, well, I don't want to create what other people want. I want to create what I want, and my impulses, my imagination, my desires.
Right.
But if your goal is to make a living, right, then there's a balance to be found, right? And if you engage with your customer segment, like a theater, for example, and you understand what their pain points are, what their aspirations are, passions, interests, so on and so forth, you can use your creative imagination and you can create value with them in mind. And there's a very high likelihood they're going to love what you're doing. You ask them, right? You interview them, and and you create with them in mind. In that respect, they become your muse.
Absolutely. Actually, it's so ironic. I was having this exact conversation with my 20-year-old this morning.
Right? Awesome.
He was getting ready for school, do some schoolwork and things like that. And you know, he struggled a bit in school, in high school. Now he's in college. And so he's taking some classes, and he hasn't yet quite found his purpose yet,
Yeah.
right? And very much like us when we were his age, you know. So I get it. I keep trying to get him to see that you've got to find your passion. I can't give that to
Yep.
you.
Yep.
You got to find your passion, and then how do
Yeah.
you make money at it? And
Yep.
I think that's the part he's tripping up on. Is I think he knows where he has some passions.
Yeah.
He doesn't see the pathway yet. He's
Yeah. And
still
that's okay. Right. The year
right.
of anything unknown.
And from this entrepreneurial path that you've so eloquently described, that you have gone down and developed these methods and processes and everything, you know, within an educational landscape, I think that is something that some of it comes from age, some of it comes from who you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
Right. I've been told by a very dear friend of mine, and I completely agree with her, that you are the sum of the five people that you hang around with the most.
I love that.
Right. And it's so true. And so I always look to surround myself with people that are better than me, because
Yes.
I
Yes.
want to reach for where they are.
1,000 times. Yeah.
I want my son to do the same. And I keep talking to him about, you know, find those people that you want to be like, and find ways to surround yourself with those people. And you will find the gravity of their successes pulling you forward in your own success.
Love that.
And
Yep.
from an arts landscape, you know, we have so many artists. There was just an article, I think it was in the New York Times recently, talking about funding for the arts,
Yeah.
right? We all have seen Mark Taper Forum and, you know, this theater and that theater cutting seasons or shutting their doors. I mean, Long Wharf Theater walked
Yeah.
away from their venue,
Yeah.
right? Um, and there's a lot of theaters that are struggling financially. The pandemic, we know, took a big hit. A lot of them closed their doors entirely, especially smaller ones that didn't necessarily have as good a financial footing or whatever. We had a lot of people leave the industry,
Yeah.
particularly on the technical side, right? Why would I go work 16-hour days when I can go work for Amazon and make the same amount of money and get healthcare benefits and all this other stuff? And then they don't come back.
Hmm.
So we are still climbing out of that. But then we see bright, shining spots like the music industry
Yeah.
that is thriving at the moment.
Yeah.
And so there's this idea within arts management of lack of entrepreneurship and lack of aligning mission and vision,
Yeah.
or understanding mission and vision and applying an entrepreneurial mindset
Yep.
to that mission and vision, you know, and not understanding the differences between the two. Like, you can have a mission, but your vision needs to align with that mission. And how
Yep.
do you get from A to B, and where do you see yourself down the line, and
Yeah.
how do you get there?
And it
And
gives you a trajectory, right? A target.
absolutely, you know, and you and I, having started businesses, that's really like you said earlier, the North Star, right?
Yeah.
Of how you get there. Where do you want to be? Where you see yourself? And it's not going to be a straight line.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, it's going to be all over the place. You're going to have successes, you're going to have failures, but how you learn from those failures. To me, a failure is not doing anything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Failure is saying, I'm just not even going to try because I'm not going to be a success.
Right.
But
That's a good
I
point.
failed spectacularly
Same here. I need to
so
take
many things,
risks.
right? Where it's just been, all right, that blew up in my face, but let's
Yeah.
tear it apart and see what didn't work, and how do
Yeah.
we
Self-learning.
do
Yeah.
shuffle the deck chairs and try again.
Yeah.
And it's that drive, that North Star, as you put it, that keeps you moving forward into that allows you to have that success. And success might not be what you originally envisioned it,
Yeah, it's true.
right?
Yeah.
And you know, what I want you to talk a little bit about that from your lens, from an entrepreneurship lens, and from an educational side of that. How do you guide people through that process to get them to learn those things and understand those things before they head down this journey?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm into this idea of a process I ask my students to go through as we do an exercise or, while we're reviewing content. I say reflect, recall, assess, articulate, or reflect, recall, articulate, right? So they have to be a bit introspective, and they have to try to reinforce their learning through recall in this process. And there's another inherent skill with artists that leads to self-learning, which I think you're talking about,
Hmm.
right? The lifelong learning, because you become your own teacher. But what that requires is a measure of introspection, right? And honesty with self and critical thinking to be able to analyze honestly, successes and failures, and not to rely on others' notions of success, because everybody has a notion, right? You should be doing right, but instead defining those metrics for yourself. What is success, right? And defining your personal vision and mission, because then based on goals that you establish, if you hit the market or not, right? Or the target or not. And if you didn't, you can try again, right? And you can learn from that failure and become a self-teacher. And I think there's a lot of confidence to be found in that. But this idea of having clear visions of what success looks like, everything's changing around us all the time. We know this. The market is volatile. The universe is volatile. Like everything within our bodies is changing all the time. So Campbell talks about if you hold on to old forms, you risk putrefaction, right? Because everything is changing around us. So we may have an aspiration, a vision for what's possible, but as we know as creatives, it's the journey, it's the process,
Hmm.
right? And that's self-discovery and illumination, if you will. And by going through that process, information changes. We acquire new information, new values, discover new passions in the process. And if we were to stick to that old form of what we thought was successful, as we're changing, and developing as people, and with greater maturity and insight and that sort of thing, it's critical that we adjust the target, that we adjust the goal, because it can be rich with meaning, and it can address needs within life. And our perspective might have been a little traditional, and status quo objectives. And by being in the field, by kind of winging it in the moment and going on the adventure, the unknown, and figuring things out as you go, and sacrificing towards something larger than yourself, and all the things that make up the hero journey, then there's a high likelihood that one, your treasure will change. It's not gold, it's self-knowledge, right? As the hero journey tells us. So I think being receptive to that, and a lot of young people in college today, they don't know what passion means necessarily. A
No.
lot of artists do. They feel a calling, they get that, but not all students do. And so I try to translate for them, what causes you to lose all track of time, right? So time becomes relative. You thought 30 minutes passed, you were surprised it was 2 hours, right? You were so enmeshed, you were in a flow state, or Japanese called mushin, right? So what was that? Look at that, because there's probably something in there. It's your bliss, Campbell says, follow your bliss and you always have your bliss.
A- Absolutely. It's I think it's really interesting that as you say, the world is changing, right? How we produce art today, and theater is an industry steeped in tradition,
Yeah.
right? And so sometimes you have to break out of that mold of we've always done it this way,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And knowledge is often passed down through oral history
Mm-hmm.
or through apprenticeship, things like that. So you're learning from the past cultures.
Yep.
um, Things like George Floyd, the pandemic, the Me Too movement, and a variety of other things have really upended our industry.
Yep.
Then you plug in financial concerns
Mm-hmm.
and you plug in the evolution of new forms of technology and entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
and what people have at their fingertips
Yeah.
can occupy their time. You talk about losing yourself in things. Again, I watch my 20-year-old. He's got cell phone, an iPad, a TV, and a laptop all going at the same time, right?
Yeah, totally.
And he understands that it's total ADHD brain, right? He understands everything that's going on in all of those, watching all 500 proverbial cable channels at the same time.
Yep.
As we're evolving, and I think so many people say, oh, theater's dying. Well, theater's been dying for thousands of years,
Totally.
right? We're evolving. And I think we're going to come out of this. We are coming out of the pandemic, rethinking what that means. And I think that's where that entrepreneurial mindset is even more valuable today,
Yeah, I totally agree.
right? Even 5 years ago.
Well,
We
you're
got, we got complacent.
yeah, and you're talking about struggles that theaters face, and how goals can shift and things like that. So Lee Brewer of Mob of Minds came to the theater school in Norway. At that time, Mob of Minds had been around for decades, I think 3 decades.
Mm-hmm.
Most theater companies don't last, longer than about 10 years on average. And I asked him, I said, Lee, Mob of Minds, an avant-garde theater company, no less, super niche, has lasted 30 years when most don't. How have you been able to accomplish that? And he said, we're the ever expanding and shrinking company.
Right.
So when we have resources, maybe we do gospel colonus, 80-person gospel choir, with starring Morgan Freeman, this sort of thing. They have the resources, but when they don't, he said we'd scale down. And, we do productions in our own rehearsal studio. We didn't build costumes. We pulled from our closets. We didn't pay for licensing. We wrote our own scripts, right? And so they become self-sufficient. They were able to scale up and scale down. And he said that enabled us to survive over time. And that's very entrepreneurial thinking, right? So I think if more were to do that, and not all models can afford that,
Sure.
they're as such, but there's a lot of value to be had in that lesson.
Yeah, I think again, I was talking about this New York Times article. One of the things that they were talking about is the shifting financial models and financial contribution, right? I talked a little bit about this with Christina Cruz not too long ago, who looks at this. That's what she does for a living, and so many um, folks have different ideas of how to financially support the arts. Some are saying we should fund the artist directly. We should, you know, bolster up the institutions, and I don't know if there's a right answer. I think it's really kind of a case by case basis as to what brings that intrinsic value to a community.
Yeah.
To be able to determine, and who does the determining of whether or not that's worthy or not. I think I actually just saw an article, I think it was this morning even, about theater in Dallas,
Yeah.
how it's thriving um, because of arts funding in small communities around the greater Dallas area.
My
And
wife
is the
part of
economic driver for these small communities,
there's,
right?
it's popular to give to the arts right now, thankfully, and there's a lot of money in Dallas, and philanthropy is alive and well. My wife serves as director of cultural tourism for Visit Dallas, and her job is to encourage the creation of cultural productions and otherwise cultural activities. And to do so, she gives cash awards of up to $25,000 to be able to market, to bring people into the community and stay in hotels. And that helps fund the arts, not exclusively, of course, it needs to come from a multitude of sources, but there is funding like that, and I never in my wildest dreams imagined, one, I'd be back in Dallas. I grew up here. I was like,
Yeah,
leaving,
yeah.
never returning, but it's a totally different city
Sitting
today.
here in Cleveland for the same reason.
Yeah, yeah. We have the largest contiguous arts district in America, in Dallas, Texas. I
Right.
couldn't believe it upon returning. So it's ever evolving. Everything's changing, right?
Yeah, and I think it is fascinating to see what that means, and certainly where I find challenges. And again, it's back to how do you get people to see their passion, but also help educate them
Yeah.
about what these changes are. Where sometimes I go into these smaller communities in the middle of nowhere that, hey, we've got this 1920s theater that we don't know what to do with. We want to put money into it. But the people that are involved are civic minded people. They don't necessarily come from the arts, but they've got a passion of this idea that we need to have arts involved. We've
Yeah.
got this asset, and we're going to pour money into this. And I oftentimes try to pump the brakes with them and say that's, they're thinking theater from the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and what that means, right?
Yeah.
And because they're of a particular demographic that that's what they most attach themselves to. And you got to say, let's slow down. Let's bring in a Christina Cruz or somebody like her who does the business planning and the market studies and things like that to see really what is that appetite, and then put the right leadership in place to then take whatever arts organization you think you should have within this community to have that mission and that vision, and be able to have the community get on the same page and all row the boat in the same direction, so that you can tell that great story and have that entrepreneurial spirit around it so that it can thrive and be successful. Yes. Right. And so that it's not just the artistic director or the executive director or the chairman of the board who's leading that charge, but the community that is invested in the success of that entrepreneurial vision of creating this arts endeavor within their small little community. Yes. Can blossom it and see success.
Yep.
So I think that's I see that day in and day out with our clients, and those are the types of projects that I love to be involved with.
Yeah,
you get to have that bit of kernel, and I find myself drawing from that entrepreneurial experience.
Yeah,
to be able to help guide them down that path towards their own success. And it's that what we started talking with about mentorship.
Yeah.
How do you mentor these people? And they're not necessarily always the mom and pops. Some of them are really big organizations.
Yeah.
But you get to have them rethink their own vision instead of saying, what did we do 10 years ago? Yeah. What do we want to do 10 years from now?
Yes.
How do we head down that path? Right.
Yep.
So within your experience of entrepreneurship on a global scale, right? I mean, you've worked all over the world. What did you see translate from your experience in Oslo, from over here? Like, what were you able to bring that maybe you didn't find here, that you said, oh, this is maybe something that's missing, or working over in Russia or Iran or any of these other places, that you felt like taking little nuggets from these different experiences and then filtering that into the process that you have and what you're teaching people?
Yeah, a couple I'll share, Taiwan and Norway. So in Taiwan, I co-founded the Worldwide Art Collective, an international theater festival. I think there were 17 different nationalities who came to Taiwan. Some were present there, and shared their work and opened doors for collaboration and this sort of thing. But it was international in scope. And putting myself in that multicultural environment with theater artists who were thinking very differently than I was in my background at Yale, it really served as stimuli, and it triggered new ideas because the stimuli was foreign to me. It was new, and it triggered my imagination. And when I built the theater school in Norway, one of the things I was super interested in as a result of Taiwan was world theatrical traditions. Like, how can we, like kind of like Julie Taymor does, like how can we draw from cultures and sometimes ancient traditions? Like if you watch Lion King, you're like, oh, that's Chinese influence, that's Indonesian, that's Japanese bunraku, that's Commedia from Italy, so on and so forth. But those multitude of inspirations beyond the common in our traditional customs can be a phenomenal source for new ideas and innovations. So bringing that into the school really served. But also when I was building the school in Norway, I was asked these two questions by journalists, government officials, the union, press, generally. And these are the two questions consistently asked. One, what makes what you're doing different?
Right.
Okay, that was easy to, do a little market research, understand who the players are, what our varied missions are, and what we're doing differently from one another. But the other question was, and what makes you necessary? And that one kept me up at night, trying to figure that out. How are you different and how are you necessary? And what I eventually landed upon with the question of how are you necessary, there's only one way to be necessary, and that's to serve something larger than yourself, right? Yeah. It's a service-based activity. And it doesn't have to be in the capacity of serving in a nonprofit environment necessarily. It's a headspace, it's taking the focus off of you and putting it onto others. And as an entrepreneur, if you're going to be successful, you must be aware of that, because people are either going to pay or they're not. and you're either going to have a viable entity or you're not,
Right.
so you've got to meet the needs of others as well as yourself. Sometimes they don't know what they need, and it's an innovation, in which case you educate them in the process. But you must be aware of the community because you're playing a role within it. And if you want the community to be on board and for it to be their theater as you are communicating, they have to play a role and you have to serve them.
Yeah, I think that sort of disruptor mentality,
Yeah.
right? That we see in business, especially in the tech space, all the time.
Yeah.
And we've seen tech businesses come and go because somebody said, "Oh, I've got a great idea," but exactly to your point, it might solve their need, but
Hmm.
doesn't solve anybody else's challenge.
Right. Yep.
And so that now they've got a widget that
Yeah.
works great for them or a small select number of people. But,
Hmm.
if you look at Apple as a great example, Apple did not invent the smartphone.
Yeah.
Motorola.
Yeah.
And what Apple did is they made it more purposeful for everyone else and solved everyone else's challenges and made it intuitive.
Yeah. And who knew we needed that?
Who knew? Who knew? Who knew we needed pet rocks back in the 70s? So this has been fantastic talking with you. I have one more question for you
Yeah.
before we wrap here. And what advice would you give people from your lens of, hey, I am in this crazy business, but I'm kind of in that stuck place. What would you say to them? And knowing where you've come from and the challenges you had and how you got to where you are and the journey that you had. If you could go back to a younger you, what would you say?
Yeah. I'd say five things. One, follow your bliss. That great life of ever find joy or will cause you to lose all track of time. Follow that because opportunities can emerge as a result of that. And if you follow dollars alone, like that can dry up, as we know.
Mm-hmm.
That can go away. But if you're following your bliss, you've got your bliss. When you don't know how to do something, figure it out. 3 words, very powerful. If you own it, figure it out. All the information is out there, right? You've got a vast network. Utilize your network, right? So lean on the skills of others and don't be afraid to ask for help. Get mentorship, as part of that. Collaborate with others. Don't try to do it alone because it can be overwhelming and there's a high likelihood of burnout, right, in the process. And you just can't be all things to all people, nor should you even try, right? Collaborate with others and bring in skills that you don't have. In that respect, you kind of assimilate their powers, like the wizard archetype. Introduce yourself to new stimuli because that can trigger new ideas. And sometimes we need to get away from the way things are commonly done, the status quo, right? And the given power structure and the way things presently are, this sort of thing. And we need to break the status quo. It's creative destruction, it's known as Schumpeter's idea, right? So by breaking the status quo, you're introducing new ideas and you're going to disrupt the existing power structure. And they're probably going to be threatened by that because they don't want to relinquish their power. They want to keep it and grow it, right? So once you start disrupting the given power structure, creating a new status quo in which you are now a part, you're going to get pushed back upon. And that's not a bad thing. That's an indicator that you're gaining traction,
Right.
right? You're having a measure of success because they're motivated to push back, right? And there's this supposed quote, neither person either said it, but it's commonly attributed to Gandhi and Schumpeter, which is first, they ignore you. Second, they mock you or laugh at you. Third, they violently oppose you. And fourth, they accept you as self-evident. And I'll add to that, they might even claim credit for your success and
Sure.
having discovered you, right? But if you recognize like, oh, I'm getting pushback, this is difficult, I'm being challenged in considerable ways, maybe you should absolutely keep putting one foot in front of the other because you're having impact and you're threatening the existing power structure and you're creating change, right? But that is the process of things.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's a big one for me is if you're not doing something relevant and new, no one's going to pay attention and nobody's going to care.
And why should
you start to pay attention and push back on you? And I certainly have experienced that in my own life. Jim, thank you so much for your time today. It has been fantastic catching up and hearing all of your little nuggets of wisdom. For all of our listeners, please tune in next time as well for more highly entertaining and exciting conversation with other very talented people in this landscape of theater operations and management and all things arts. So thank you and have a great day. And thanks for listening. Thanks for taking the time today to listening to Theater Operations Unleashed. We hope to see you next month.